myself, I'm Nick Tatum. I'm from Abergavenny Town Council. I'm acting chairman of the Larger Councils Committee. This is Mike Cuddy from Penarth. Have you any other titles?
I think I'm vice chair of one voice.
Vice chair of one voice. Right. Well, there we are. Right. Bit of competition. Right. And Lynn Cadwell, who's obviously our chief executive. And then if we go on to our next speaker, is that okay, David? From talking about devolution of services and asset transfers, support for community and town councils. Richard. Okay, over to Richard.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Good morning. Yes, I'm going to talk about assets, buildings, but obviously important to put in the context of buildings. Why do we hold buildings? They're either there to deliver a particular service, to support community engagement in some shape or form. They're there to support some kind of function. And so that's where the agenda, that's what I'll be talking in the round. Let's get the bad news over with first, I think. This is the reality of life that we're facing at the moment in terms of the financial context. Significant pressures on the Welsh Government's budget. The budget is 8% lower in real terms than it was in 2010. That means approximately 1.5 billion reduced from what it was delivering at that time. And we're going to face further cuts in terms of within Welsh Government. 1920 does not look particularly great, but really we're in the hands of the UK government in terms of what their approach is to austerity and whether they want to change austerity in the more immediate term, and what that means then in terms of any additional monies that may come to Wales as a consequence. And also we have some unknowns, obviously, and that's in terms of we don't know what Brexit means, and we won't know for some time. But there were more brighter people than me doing the scenario planning within the government and the financials. But it's an unknown at the moment, and that's the reality of life that we're having to work with. So difficult times ahead, difficult decisions, and that's why we need to make the best use of all our resources. So not just money, but assets, because obviously after assets we're quite asset rich really within the Welsh public sector. I'll come on to later on in terms of the work we're doing on National Assets Working Group and the database, but there are around 24,000 public sector land and building assets in Wales, and that's not including community assets because we haven't mapped those yet, and also those assets held by social enterprises, etc. So you can see that there's a real opportunity there, but there's a real challenge as well in terms of, because I think the bottom line is that existing asset base is not affordable. So that's the challenge we're facing. It's something in my day job, in the internal day job that we face within Welsh Government. I first met Mike when he came into Welsh Government with the WDA. At that time, we had an office estate of 100 buildings across Wales. We're now down to 30, and we're having to reduce even more in terms of the budgets. Again, making significant savings, but also fulfilling a ministerial commitment that we would have a presence across Wales. So our core estate is located across Wales in terms of 10 to 13 core buildings, and those will retain, and we will invest in those buildings. So again, the important thing is we invest for the long term, but are investing in those assets that we know that we will retain for the long term. So the most recent office building that we've been investing in is in Carmarthen. Again, a significant investment, but again, I think demonstrating our commitment to that area and retaining a major Welsh Government presence there for some time to come. But it is an invest-to-save approach. So we've got some money available, we invest in our capital, but in the longer term, we are making significant savings to the budget. And that's really the expectation we have across the wider Welsh public sector, especially local authorities, in terms of how they look at their estate. Obviously, there's a lot happening at the moment in terms of lots of change, lots of uncertainty in terms of what is the structure of local government going to be moving forward. Obviously, Welsh Government published the white paper consultation in January, which closed on the 11th of April, I think. We've had 167 responses. I think one Voice Wales is going to submit a response. Composition is the Cabinet Secretary and officials are reviewing the responses. And he is expected and hoping to make a statement on the consultation and the way forward before the summer recess at the end of this month. So there will be some news there. But one thing is certainly is set really moving forward, regardless of the feedback, etc. There is going to be more regional working. He's expecting more collaboration. I think the white paper, gave the option of voluntary mergers, etc., if they wanted to, but there wasn't any, no compulsion there. But I think in terms of within the paper, there was a section on regional asset collaboration, and he is expecting a lot more work to be done on that agenda. And again, the whole purpose of looking at the asset base is, again, trying to create a platform that's affordable and sustainable in the longer term. And again, the more we can save on surplus assets, etc., the more money we can divert into frontline services. So again, that's the important thing in terms of, I know ministers are very keen in terms of protecting services as far as they can, but obviously that doesn't mean to say that the delivery of those services may change moving forward. And I think that's something we have to I hope embrace really, because that is unfortunately the reality that we're working within at the moment. So the National Assets Working Group, okay. Again, this was set up in 2011, and it was in the context of pressures on budgets. Again, it was about making better use of our assets. I think there was a feeling that the public sector as a whole wasn't really particularly focused on its land and building estate. It certainly wasn't attaching as much scrutiny to its building assets as it was to its monetary assets, and obviously, and when you think about the how much the Welsh government, the Welsh public sector asset estate is worth around £12 billion. I think we're paying around £500 million a year to manage and run the estate. And I don't think we have a full picture as to what the backlog maintenance figure is for the Welsh public sector estate. So you can see there, that is the opportunity, but it is a real challenge really. So again, the group which is set up and is composed of broad public sector membership. It's always been chaired by a local authority, chief executive. So the current chief executive is Helen Patterson from Wrexham. And it's about enabling and influencing a best practice collaborative approach to asset management, developing some best practice guides and case studies, and putting the tools in there to support the agenda. Lynn has always been an active member of the National Assets Working Group, and obviously we'll come on to the CAT guide in a minute, but obviously he was the main driver really in getting that CAT guide developed. So in terms of some of the streams within the National Assets Working Group, the first thing we did was develop the land and property database. If you don't know where the assets are, then obviously we haven't got much chance in terms of trying to get this collaborative approach and knowing where we can share the assets, where assets could possibly be disposed of. So that's the one now where we have 24,000 approximately entries on there. And then obviously it's what you usually make of those assets. It's all very well mapping the assets, that's fine, but obviously you've got to make it's the so what question. And that's when we start moving forward then in terms of how you use your asset base far more effectively in delivering your service or policy objectives. And then you look at the surplus assets and how we deal with that. And so we've got the Space Cymru. So at the moment what we do within the Welsh public sector is if any public sector organisation declares an asset as surplus, in the first place it markets it exclusively within the Welsh public sector for 40 days. So there may be somebody else within the local area who has an interest or needs that asset, so there can be a transfer between those organisations. After the 40 days, it goes in the open market, but it also goes on a publicly accessible Space Cymru portal as well, which is held on, which can be accessed by the Welsh Government website. So again, everyone here can view what assets are available at the moment within the Welsh public sector, and there may be something there that may meet your requirements. Linking on to the assets then is how you transfer the assets between organisations. So we developed the land transfer protocol. Quite a few instances where assets are transferred between public sector organisations. They'd both be appointing chartered surveyors or agents to negotiate. It's all coming out of the same pot of money. What we developed was the land transfer protocol, where both parties agree to appoint one agent. They agree the terms of reference for the appointment, and evaluation is produced that for both parties will go with. We then developed out the second version, where in terms of co-location and sharing accommodation, so that's where we've developed some guidance on how you share accommodation, some simple occupation agreements, etc. Trying to do as much work as possible before you have to engage solicitors, and trying to save on some on the financial costs associated with any agreement or any transaction. And then we got into the Community Asset Transfer Guide, which again we'll come to that in a bit more detail later. And we've also looked at fleet and passenger transport. Again, that's something where we felt organisations could share assets. So we've given some, I think we made available 50,000 people for organisations to bid for, which really gave them some capacity funding to do some evaluation work, look at some models as to how the fleet estate could be used better. We've got a sitting example where Bridgend County Council and South Wales Police have developed a joint fleet facility, and I know they've made significant savings on the back of that. But I know it's another area where there are potentially significant savings can be made. And these are the tools then that we've linked on the back of really of that work. EPIMS Lite is the database. We've got the protocol, which will be updated shortly. The Community Asset Transfer Guide, which again I'll cover that in detail. Assets Cymru is the website. We used to have our own website for Assets Cymru, but it's now part of the Welsh Government website. But if you go into the Welsh Government website, type in Assets Cymru, it'll take you to the front page, and then it'll take you through to all the guides, etc., of the work of the National Assets Working Group, and other links there as well. So there's that's quite easy. Finding some government space, that is a meeting room database. So again, we were finding that lots of public sector organisations were booking rooms, paying quite a lot of money for rooms, while other organisations had existing facilities that could be made available. So again, we've, within Welsh Government, we have agreement with quite a few organisations in terms of using facilities in Llandudno Junction, Aberystwyth, two examples. So we're quite open in terms of making some rooms available. It becomes a bit more problematic in Cathays Park because the way it's configured, security issues, etc. It becomes more, sometimes it's a bit more difficult really from that perspective. Again, that takes you through to the, that's a snapshot of when you go into the portal by the Welsh Government website. That's where you come to, again, with the various tabs on the right-hand side. If you click on those, again, it'll take you through to the various documents, etc., and various guidance and that we've got. And again, when you go to Space Cymru, again, this is where you get into the for sale to let. You can see what's available in terms of all the assets. So there we are, and that does take you into the guide. Before I move on to the community asset transfers, in terms of the next steps for the National Assets Working Group, one thing the Cabinet Secretary was very keen on, he wanted to increase the pace and ambition of the work of the National Assets Working Group. He felt that we needed to make a far bigger impact in terms of the collaborative asset management agenda, making better use of assets, generating those savings. So we have, over the last 12 months, we did a study within the Cwmtaf Public Service Board area of looking at the collective asset estate and seeing what programme of work could be developed on the back of that. That report will be published this month. And again, I think it's been quite helpful in terms of, in the first place, giving everyone a view of what their collective estate is. What's the value of that collective estate? How efficiently that estate is being used? And also some of the issues in terms of having an appreciation of what the backlog maintenance figure is, etc. So again, there's a programme that's been identified. The Public Service Board will now have the opportunity to take that forward and develop an action plan as we move forward. Quite an interesting area, the Cwm Taf Public Service Board area, because it's the one area where there are two local authorities are part of the PSB. So it's quite interesting to see the dynamic of different authorities working together and how they collaborate, and probably how people have different interpretations of what collaboration actually means and what the expectations are. So that was quite it was quite interesting sitting around the table and understanding the dynamics of all of that. The other thing is that within the, I'm not sure if any of you have read the white paper on local government reform, but within the regional asset collaboration section, the Cabinet Secretary did make it known that he was minded to make £2 million of new investment available to support this agenda. So on the back of that, we've now developed an asset collaboration programme in Wales, and we will be inviting bids from across Wales in terms of if there's any projects, any pilots, anything that I think may be useful in terms of this broad agenda to bid for the money. So it gives you capacity funding to whether you need to appoint consultants or project manager, etc., to take forward any key area of work that you think might be useful in terms of not just to the particular local organisation or group of organisations, but maybe then be helpful to across a wider Wales as well. So that will be again announced shortly. We will be. It's very much again back to a place-based approach. We see it being regional working or place-based, however you want to do it really. The Cwm Taf work is useful, but actually the circumstances differ from one group to the other. So while there are particular principles which I think have been established, I think we need to flex to the circumstances of whatever area may be interested in taking on this work. Again, that's when you click on the Assets Cymru and the maps, you can then you can have a spreadsheet or a map, and you can click on and scroll down into the assets, and it'll give you high-level information in terms of what the asset is, and more importantly, who the contact is to gain more information about the asset and what the plans may be. Okay, community asset transfers. This was initiated by Lynn. In terms of the National Assets Working Group, this was a piece of work that was initiated by Lynn in terms of the view was that there needed to be some more support out there for organisations taking on community assets. And actually there needed to be some common understanding and more transparency around community asset transfers in terms of the information that could be made available, so that basically organisations who are going into these transfers with their eyes open and understanding fully what commitments, what obligations they were potentially taking on. And there was also, I think, a feeling at the time that local authorities were potentially looking to transfer liabilities. So again, it's what the truth of that is, I don't know, but I think whatever, it was important that we address that issue. In terms of the benefits of the CAT, obviously, I mean, you know better than me in terms of self-explanatory, really, in terms of what that generally, what they can do. Again, it's important that the one thing we do say in the guide, I'm sure you've seen it, but we do say sometimes that not all assets should be subject to community asset transfers, and this is the difficult. Sometimes this is the difficult space you're in, and that's for some there isn't a case for community asset transfer, or it's also a case that there may be a case for community asset transfer, but the nature of the service delivered from that facility may need to change in the light of what the modern requirements are. So if I take swimming pools as an example, a few swimming pools have been transferred, but actually in this day and age people don't talk about swimming pools, they talk about leisure. So when they go to a facility, they're not looking just for a swimming pool, they're looking for a wider suite of services or leisure facilities that they can access. So again, that's something that needs to be considered as we move forward. And again, as you widen that service provision, you're obviously increasing potentially your income stream. And again, that's something you need. That's the other issue of community asset transfers, and this is the message that we have to convey. The grant culture is a thing of is not a thing of the past, but I don't think you can rely on the grant forever and a day. I'm afraid it is the real world, and I think organisations need to think about when they take on community asset transfers, creating some kind of sustainable model based on a sound business case, understanding the finances around it, and understanding and having robust projections in terms of what the income streams and what the expenditure is going to be around those assets. I think the other challenge is for community asset transfers, for move on, is that for a lot of them there's lots of enthusiasm, but that enthusiasm can wane. And that's when you get into the challenge of how you sustain that facility after those people who've really committed fully to it. But there comes a point where you can't keep giving the same amount of effort, and there'll be other pressures on your lives, whatever. So how do you cover for that as well? This is. But I say, I mean, that is, this was the starting point really in terms of, and this was the scepticism in terms of, and there was I think a concern at the time, 3 years ago, that there was going to be a flood of local authority assets being released, etc. I don't think that's happened, but I think there is a point coming where obviously local authorities are going to have to review what their asset base is, what they're statutorily committed to continue to deliver, and what they do with the balance potentially. So it is something that's very, very live at the moment. So that's the guide. The guide was actually launched at Pontyclun. I think, Paul, you were there. Jane Hutt was launched it. That was the first version. We're in the process of updating the document with new case studies, understanding where we are now in the context of the reform agenda, albeit I think at the moment we still have in a bit of unknown territory in terms of for communities what the strategy is fully moving forward. I think Lynn, you were at the last National Assets Working Group, there was talk of the Made in Wales approach, but actually we don't quite know what that Made in Wales approach is yet. I think and they're still engaging and just trying to understand that. Again, this is really in terms of this really does give a synopsis of why the guide was developed. Again, and actually that is just as relevant today as it was back in 2014. And it's and this is the guide again is a starting point really, and it does flag up issues, the kind of issues that need to be considered prior to making any form of commitment on the transfer. So again, you're looking at what's the condition of the property, maintenance of the property, what's the maintenance plan, what information are the local authorities making available to the organisations so that they can have a full understanding of what investment's gone into the property, are there items which are likely to need changing, the boilers example, those kind of things. There may be some big ticket items there that haven't been renewed anytime recently. So again, that's you need to have a full understanding of that really. There may be some things where you're taking on services and obviously you'll be taking on staff as well. So again, understanding what their terms and conditions are, understanding the 2P provisions. one of the issues we've got at the moment is in terms of the guide, in terms of updating the guide, is obviously the TUC are not overly impressed in terms of they would like certain terms and conditions protected, in terms of fair deal and all of that. The guide is there to reflect current policy, current statutory obligations. The guide is not there and is not there to create new policy. And so that's why it's been delayed at the moment. But again, we hope that the guide, the updated guide, will be published over the summer. It will also have some new case studies in there. And it's been quite interesting, actually. I've had some discussions with a couple of councils recently and looking at their approach to community asset transfers. Now, it may be they're telling me a story and it's different on the ground, I don't know, but certainly Carmarthenshire County Council seem to be quite proactive in terms of community asset transfers and also quite supportive. That's the impression I got from them. We come back to that. And I'm also meeting Cardiff shortly because they've appointed a community asset transfer officer. And again, she's, as my understanding is, she works closely with organisations who are looking to take on community asset facilities. And I think Bridgen Council, from memory, appointed a community asset transfer officer not so long ago as well. So I think it's getting profile. It's also important for local authorities to have community asset transfer policies. And I know that quite a few local authorities have actually developed, and some have developed, others have updated their community asset transfer policies, taking on board the principles set out within the guide. So I think that's been quite helpful, really. So again, that's the issue in terms of where we think those are the opportunities. But again, I can't underestimate enough the challenge that you have when you take on facilities. It isn't, and it's the ongoing commitment. There is work going on in terms of how do we support the sector in terms of taking on these transfers. The guide is one element. And actually Emily is here, and obviously the Welsh Government did fund a pilot where we had an officer who was supporting community groups on transfers. The money was administered through Gavo. I haven't seen the final report. I mean, I think it was a positive. I mean, Richard, those of you who might have met Richard Davis, he's very enthusiastic about this agenda. He obviously has a business background, so I think he did bring the right approach in terms of how you looked at. I think you take it on a business footing, really. You have to have that kind of reality. I know there was some view that kind of support role should be rolled out wider. Unfortunately, we go back to the age-old problem of money. But I think we're looking at the moment within Welsh Government, what is the approach moving forward in terms of community assets, and then on the back of that, then what support mechanisms need to be put in place and made available to help whatever the policy, whatever the strategy is moving forward, how that is successfully delivered. So I think it's watch that space. That's not within my area. It may be covered a bit later next week, Lynn, at that event. But again, I think, as I say, that they're still working through what is the Made in Wales approach, making it distinctive, but also, again, linked to the Future Generations Act, creating a long-term sustainable model for the community assets moving forward.
Can we squeeze 5 minutes of questions in?
Yeah, I finished. That's my last slide.
Okay, super. Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed.
Okay.
Thank you. Right, I think I probably omitted to, in my rush to hear